He didn't yell. He didn't push back. He didn't even raise his cane. When the teenager shoved him off the curb and into the blaring traffic of Charleston Avenue, 90-year-old Harold Jennings, Master Gunnery Sergeant, USMC, retired, simply caught his balance, straightened his coat, and stood silent in the middle of honking horns, as if the sting of disrespect hurt deeper than the risk of broken bones. Behind him, the boys laughed, high-fived even, amused by the image of an old man stumbling for his life. 20 minutes later, as they regrouped in a dead-end alley to relive the moment, something blocked the light. Boots, polished, silent, deliberate. 8 Marines. No sirens. No words at first. Just present. What happened next didn't make headlines, but for weeks afterward, the kids who once mocked veterans crossed the street when they saw a flag. Because in that alley, something greater than punishment happened. It was a lesson taught by silence, delivered in the language of honor. If you believe some things are sacred, watch what unfolds next. Comment honor if you still stand for those who stood for us, and follow this story if you're one of the few who never stopped believing in dignity. At 90 years old, Harold Jennings still walked with the quiet precision of a man who had once commanded the chaos of war. His frame was thin now, stooped slightly at the shoulders, but his posture remained unmistakably proud. He wore a weathered olive coat, frayed at the cuffs, a tan wool flat cap pulled low over sharp gray eyes that had seen too much and spoken too little. His gait, though aided by a smooth-handled wooden cane, retained a rhythm, a deliberate cadence, like footsteps that once matched the beat of marching drums on foreign soil. There was no fragility in his presence, only time. Harold lived alone in a second-floor walk-up overlooking a faded little park in Henderson, Nevada. No wife, no children, just the quiet company of books, old jazz records, and a pot of coffee that started brewing every morning at 6:00 a.m. Sharp. Every Friday he dressed in his best, clean slacks, polished shoes, and that same olive coat to walk 4 blocks to the bakery for a single eclair, always eaten at the same bench, always facing east. The routine wasn't about sugar. It was about stillness, about a kind of personal order in a world that no longer seemed to care who he had once been, because the world didn't remember. Harold had served 32 years in the United States Marine Corps. 3 wars, 9 deployments, and more medals than he ever hung on walls. He enlisted at 17, lied about his age to join the Pacific Campaign, bled through Korea, and led men through the jungles of Vietnam. His body bore the echoes of it, a scar down his left thigh, a fused wrist that cracked when he turned doorknobs, and tinnitus that never truly faded. But those weren't the marks that haunted him most. It was the silence after, coming home to parades that faded, promises that thinned, neighbors who looked through him as if valor had an expiration date. Kids these days didn't even look up from their phones. Shop clerks rushed past him like he was invisible. Once, a barista had rolled her eyes when he asked for Senior Discount Monday on a Thursday. Like dignity had a schedule. And still, Harold never raised his voice, never reminded anyone who he'd been. That wasn't the Marine way. But lately, something in the air had shifted. The group of boys outside the bakery had started lingering longer, laughing louder. Just yesterday, one of them had stared at him, unblinking, and spat near his feet. Not at him, but close enough to say, "We see you, and we don't care." Harold had seen worse. He'd walked through mortar fire, dragged bleeding men out of collapsed jungle bunkers, and held pressure on wounds while bullets tore through the trees above. But nothing had prepared him for the moment a boy young enough to be his grandson sneered in his face and shoved him like a bag of trash. It started with a voice. "Old soldier, huh? What are you, like 100? The kid was tall, maybe 16, with a backwards cap, a chin full of false swagger, and a crowd of copycats behind him. They sprawled across the bakery bench, feet stretched over the sidewalk, making sure no one could pass without stepping into the gutter. Harold stood before them, cane in one hand, the other resting on the lapel of his coat. "Excuse me, lads," he said, voice low, raspy, even polite. "Just trying to get through." The leader didn't move, just stared at him, unblinking. "Yeah, I think we mind. Find another route, Grandpa." The others snickered. Another chimed in, "Go home before you fall and break something." Harold didn't scowl, didn't challenge. He just adjusted the angle of his cane and tried to step around. That's when it happened. A foot came out, deliberate, timed. Another hand shoved his shoulder. His balance broke. The cane flew from his grip. His body lurched off the curb, and for a split second, he was weightless, falling into a stream of honking cars and sun-flashed windshields. Tires screeched. A horn wailed like a warning from another life. Somehow, instinct took over. He twisted, caught himself, stumbled, landed upright in the middle of the street, heart pounding like a war drum, arms trembling. Behind him, laughter. Loud. Cruel. Dalal. High fives slapped. "Look at him dance," one of them howled. "Bet he learned that in the war." Their glee echoed through the crosswalk. Harold, breath-shaking, bent slowly, methodically, and picked up his cane from where it had landed against the curb. No anger on his face. No shouting. Just silence. As if he'd seen this scene play out before, many years ago, on a very different battlefield. People watched. They saw. No one here. A man with a briefcase paused, then kept walking. A woman at the corner bakery gasped, then turned away. No one moved. No one spoke. It wasn't just disrespect. It was abandonment. Indifference. The kind that cuts deeper than wounds. A stranger finally approached. An older woman, maybe late 60s, helped steady him. "Are you all right, dear?" she asked. Harold nodded once. "Just startled, ma'am. Thank you." He brushed the dust from his sleeves with the care of a man, polishing brass buttons, then turned away from the bakery. But he didn't go home. His steps, though slow, had direction, purpose. His hand reached into his coat, pulled out an old flip phone, scratched but functional. He dialed a number he hadn't used in years, but remembered without fail. And when the line picked up, he didn't explain. He didn't need to. "Staff Sergeant Ramirez," he said calmly. "This is Master Gunnery Sergeant Jennings. Retired. We've got a situation." He didn't wear medals. He didn't need to. When Staff Sergeant Cole Ramirez stepped onto the quiet corner of Charleston and 8th, the air itself shifted, as if even the wind knew better than to move without permission. He wasn't loud. He didn't yell. But the sound of his boots against the concrete echoed like a verdict, sharp and final. No siren. No warning. Just presence. Tall. Squared at the shoulders. Face carved in calm fury, eyes scanning like radar, cool, focused, and impossible to ignore. His uniform was service-worn but perfect. Sharply creased sleeves, polished brass, glinting like the eyes of men who've seen enough to speak without raising their voice. Beside him, 7 other Marines followed, some in dress Charlies, others in utility camo, young, rigid, their expressions unreadable, but their formation flawless. They moved not like men, but like intention given form. Pedestrians looked up. Phones went down. Even passing traffic seemed to slow. The street, moments earlier filled with laughter and indifference, now stood frozen in the kind of silence only earned by the arrival of something no one wanted to challenge. Harold sat on the far bench, one leg crossed over the other, cane leaning gently against his knee. He didn't wave, didn't stand, just met Ramirez's eyes with the faintest of nods, a soldier's acknowledgement. Ramirez returned it without a word, breaking formation only to approach, boots clicking with restrained weight. He leaned in slightly, voice low. "You okay, Master Gunny?" Harold replied. Functional. That was enough. Ramirez straightened, turned toward the alley where the teens had vanished, then motioned once with his hand. The group of Marines moved without hesitation, 2 peeling off to block the alley mouth, the rest shifting into formation behind him, like pieces locking into place. No drawn weapons. No loud threats. Just the calm geometry of force and purpose. One recruit, barely out of high school, murmured something to his peer, but a single glance from Ramirez turned the boy to stone. Then he spoke. 3 words. Quiet. Measured. Lethal. No. Which way, sir? Harold didn't point. He didn't have to. He just shifted his eyes. Once, toward the alley's shadowed entrance. Ramirez nodded. No further question. No need. Every man there understood what came next. Inside that alley, there would be no violence. No headlines. No recordings. Just a conversation. Firm. Exacting. Unforgettable. Outside, the neighborhood watched in stunned silence. And though no one said it aloud, everyone felt it. Justice had arrived, and it had come wearing dress blues. They didn't see him enter the alley. Not right away. The teenagers were still laughing, passing a vape pen, reacting Harold's stumble like it was the punchline to a joke, only they found funny. One of them mimicked a cane fall, arms flailing. Another shouted, "Boomer down!" and they cracked up all over again. But then the shadows moved. Boots, 8 pairs, stepped in just far enough to block the exit. The light narrowed. And standing at the front, like a drawn line no one should cross, was Staff Sergeant Cole Ramirez. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. The sound of laughter didn't just stop. It vanished, sucked out of the air like oxygen in a sealed room. One of the boys turned, then froze, his grin dying halfway up his cheek. Another backed into the brick wall behind him, as if the concrete might save him. Ramirez stepped forward. Just once. The click of his heel on pavement was louder than any shout. No anger. No threat. Just steel in the posture. Silence in the breath, and a stare like glass before it cracked. The leader of the group, the same one who shoved Harold, tried to recover. Smirked, lips twitching with false bravado. "What's this? Grandpa called the army on us." His voice cracked slightly, but he kept going. "We didn't do nothing." Old man tripped. Ramirez looked at him. Not down, not over, straight through. Then, slowly, he reached into the chest pocket of his uniform and pulled out a phone. No rush. No drama. Just one thumb tap. And then he held it up. There was no sound. Just a video. The footage played without commentary. A shaky clip from a pedestrian's phone. Time-stamped, showing every second of the shove, the trip, the fall into traffic, the boys' laughter. It played only once. Then Ramirez lowered the phone. No outrage. No lecture. Just 5 words, spoken with quiet, surgical precision. "You pushed a Marine, son." The boy opened his mouth, then shut it. No one else moved. Not the recruits. Not the other kids. Not even the birds on the power line above. The alley had become something sacred and sealed, like a courtroom before judgment. For the first time, the teen didn't smirk. He didn't speak. His eyes dropped, not to the phone, but to the boots in front of him. His breath caught. And when Ramirez took one more step forward, he flinched, just slightly, but enough for the others to see. That's when it began to change. Not justice. Recognition. The kind that creeps in slowly, cold, heavy, and late. He could have run. That would have been his instinct once, bolt, deflect, disappear behind a wall of lies and half-smirks. But now, with 8 Marines sealing the alley behind him, and the video burned into the air like a slow-motion confession, there was nowhere left to hide. The boy's swagger had drained from his face, leaving only the damp outline of fear clinging to his jaw. His mouth opened, once, twice, as if searching for a sentence that didn't betray him, but only the sound of shallow breath came out. Ramirez didn't move. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Instead, he turned the phone outward, toward the small cluster of pedestrians who had gathered near the alley entrance. The crowd had grown since the moment Harold fell into traffic. A few bakery customers, a man from the barber shop, even the barista from across the street, her apron dusted in flour, now stood frozen, eyes locked on the screen. They watched the footage. All of it. No cuts. No excuses. Just the hard truth, framed in pixels. The shove, the stumble, the laughter. The boy's voice mocking the fall. The others high-fiving. No one laughed now. One of the teenagers mumbled, "We didn't mean to." But the words fell flat. Another nudged the ringleader, but he just stood there, frozen in his own guilt, fingers twitching like he didn't know what they were supposed to do anymore. His eyes darted, not in defiance now, but in desperation, looking for an exit, for an ally, for a lie that might still hold. What? There was none. From behind the formation, a man stepped forward. Not a Marine. Not in uniform. Just a local police officer in patrol blues. Ramirez hadn't called him, but he'd been watching. And he'd seen enough. "You got names?" the officer asked. Ramirez didn't nod. He didn't need to. The video had already spoken. The officer walked past the Marines, through the corridor of stillness, until he stood face to face with the teenager. He didn't put a hand on him. Didn't even reach for his cuffs. He just looked at him, long enough for the silence to fill every crack in the boy's composure. "Is that you?" he asked. The kid didn't answer. Couldn't. Cole just lowered his head like it weighed too much to carry. His lip trembled. His voice, when it finally came, wasn't loud, wasn't proud. "I didn't mean it." A lie? Spoken too late. Someone in the crowd muttered, "He pushed a Marine," and the ripple of that truth passed through them like a slow-moving current. Eyes dropped. A woman clutched her purse tighter. A man stepped back into the shadow of the building, as if trying to disappear. And Harold, still seated on the bench at the edge of it all, watched without judgment, without anger. Just the quiet dignity of someone who'd seen justice unfold without ever having to raise his voice. The officer finally did reach for his cuffs. No one stopped him. No one objected. And as the click of steel met the boy's wrist, the street stood still, not in vengeance, but in vindication. Because that day, the uniform wasn't defended by fists or fury, but by the weight of truth and the silence of those who chose, finally, to face it. The cuffs clicked shut with finality, but no one clapped. No one cheered. The boy didn't cry. He just stood there, wrists bound in silence, while the weight of his choices settled over the street like dusk rolling in too early. The officer guided him gently, not forcefully, past the silent line of Marines. One of the other teens tried to speak, then stopped. Whatever words they'd thrown around hours earlier now tasted like rust in their throats. Harold never stood. He didn't need to. From that bench, Kane resting beside him like an old friend, he was more than a man recovering from a shove. He was a mirror. And one by one, the town saw themselves in it. The bakery door opened with a soft chime, and the woman who had once gasped and turned away, now stepped forward. She didn't say a word, just pulled a clean napkin from her apron and gently wiped the dust from Harold's coat sleeve. Her hands trembled. Her eyes didn't meet his, but the gesture carried more weight than an apology ever could. Across the street, the barber shop owner stepped out and slowly removed his cap. He didn't bow. He just stood still, the hat held low in front of his chest like a flag half raised. Another man, a regular at the corner diner known for loud opinions and louder laughter, crossed the street without a word and placed something on the bench beside Harold. A paper bag. Inside, one chocolate eclair. Harold glanced at it, then looked up, not at the man, but at the flag on the pole just beyond the sidewalk. He gave the faintest nod, then returned his gaze to the quiet town. Still, no words. No sermon. Just the kind of silence that asks you to listen harder. A teenager, one of the group, but not the ringleader, took a step forward. He didn't approach Harold. Instead, he turned to the Marines, eyes wide and unsure. "Can I help at the station?" he asked, barely audible. Staff Sergeant Ramirez didn't answer right away. He looked to Harold. And Harold, without turning, said softly, "Every man gets to choose who he becomes. Starting now." The boy nodded, his face flushing, then stepped back, shoulders straighter than before. There was no parade, no grand declaration. But something shifted. In the quiet glances exchanged between strangers. In the way people began to pick up litter they once ignored. In the flag that hung a little prouder against the afternoon light. And in the man who sat on that bench, no longer invisible, but not seeking spotlight either. Just present. Just still. A Marine, surrounded not by applause, but by awareness. Maybe this town hadn't forgotten him. Maybe they'd just forgotten themselves. It started with a flag. Not new, not grand, just one more carefully folded than usual, raised at dawn by the bakery owner who never used to look up when Harold passed by. This time, he stood beside the pole a moment longer, hand to heart, eyes not on the sky but on the bench across the street where Harold often sat. The same bench that once watched silence become shame. And now, slow redemption. Then came the frame inside the window. A photo, black and white, slightly grainy, of a young Marine in dress blues, standing tall beside a fighter plane. No caption, no explanation, just glass and reverence. The barber was next. One morning, his waiting room wall had a new addition, a wooden plaque, etched with the words Semper Fidelis. Some stand for more than themselves. Below it, a name carved not in stone, but in respect. Harold said nothing. He returned to his walks. Same coat, same pace, same quiet. But the street no longer passed him by. A mailman slowed his step to match Harold's for a block. A teenager on a skateboard stopped to pick up the morning paper and hand it directly to him. No words. Just presence. Small changes. True ones. At the high school, a social studies teacher showed the video. Not to shame, but to teach. She didn't name Harold. Didn't need to. The students recognized the alley, the laughter, the stillness. One of them, one who used to joke too loudly in the back row, asked to stay after class. "Can I meet him?" he asked. Not for credit, just for understanding. The local VFW didn't hold a ceremony. They didn't ask Harold to speak. Instead, they replaced the dusty photo near the front entrance with a new image. Harold, seated on the bench, flanked silently by two Marines. No fanfare. Just memory in motion. And every time someone walked past, they slowed. Not out of obligation, but instinct. A small diner near the square placed a reserved sign on a corner booth. Just one word, gunnery. The waitress there stopped asking if Harold wanted coffee. She simply brought it, black and hot, placing it gently beside his cane. He always nodded once. Never asked why. Never asked for more. The town didn't change overnight. But in doorways and windows, in quiet glances and second chances, something rooted itself deeper than apology. A sense that dignity, once seen again, should never be forgotten. And one morning, when a father walked past Harold with his young son, the boy looked up and asked, "Was he really a hero?" The father paused, looked toward the bench, then said, "No, son, he's something harder. He never stopped being one." Harold didn't turn, but he smiled. The diner was nearly empty, the kind of hush that settles when breakfast has long passed and the dinner crowd hasn't yet stirred. Outside, sunlight stretched across the sidewalk in slanted stripes. Inside, two mugs sat untouched, steam rising in quiet curls between them. Harold and Cole sat across from each other, neither speaking. The clink of a spoon stirred coffee, slow and idle, just to fill the silence. A radio in the corner played something soft from decades ago, something with brass and brush cymbals, the kind of song that didn't ask to be noticed, but refused to be forgotten. Cole didn't wear his uniform that day. Just a simple shirt, sleeves rolled, the ghost of discipline still in the way he held himself. His fingers wrapped once around the mug, then rested flat on the table. He looked at his father, not searching, just holding the image, as if he hadn't really seen him in years. "You okay, old man?" he asked at last, his voice low but steady. Harold nodded once. No drama in the gesture, just enough to say he'd been through worse and survived. Cole leaned back slightly. "Didn't think I'd need you again," he added after a beat, his eyes not meeting Harold's but not avoiding them either. Harold reached for his cup. His hand was slower now, a little unsteady. Cole noticed, didn't flinch, didn't rush in, just quietly slid his own cup closer, as if to meet it halfway. Their mugs touched. Porcelain against porcelain, a muted clink that somehow carried more than a conversation. They didn't toast, didn't smile. But in that sound, something was said. From the booth behind them, someone laughed. Nothing mean. Just the easy bark of someone amused by life. A server walked by, refilled their water without interrupting the moment. Outside, a breeze caught the edge of the flag across the street and made it flutter like a breath drawn in reverence. Harold glanced toward the window. Cole followed his gaze. Two men, two generations. Same silence, same soil under their boots. Harold reached into his coat pocket and pulled out an old Marine Corps pin, brass worn soft at the edges. He didn't explain, just slid it across the table, slow and quiet, until it reached Cole's side. Cole looked at it, then at him, and said nothing. But he reached out, picked it up, and placed it over his heart. No fanfare, no gesture, just weight and memory. Then, after a long pause, they stood, together, like a rhythm remembered. No cue, no command, just a father and a son rising in unison, and stepping out into the afternoon light. In the weeks that followed, the story slipped quietly beyond the alley, the diner, the quiet street where it had begun. No headlines, no viral videos, just whispered retellings, cleaned and sharpened like heirloom knives, passed hand to hand in barbershops, whispered in Sunday school, folded into sermons about dignity and what it means to stand when it would be easier to look away. At the local high school, a civics teacher replaced that week's syllabus with something different. A printed transcript, no names, just the facts, was handed to each student. No test followed. Only a circle of chairs and a question on the board. What does honor look like when no one's watching? One girl, usually silent, stood to speak. "It looks like not laughing," she said. "It looks like stepping forward when you weren't the one who pushed." The library saw a quiet surge in checkouts from the military history section. Not for grades, but for understanding. Teenagers who once loitered outside now came in and sat down, thumbing through yellowed pages, tracing the outlines of a generation that had come before them. A boy, no older than 16, started folding flags again at the community center, carefully, by the book. He wasn't told to. He just saw the one above the diner ripple one morning, remembered how it had looked the day the Marines showed up, and decided some things were worth keeping straight. Frank never said a word. He never asked for the attention, never corrected the retellings, even when they missed details. He let them pass like wind through tall grass, ungrasped but felt. Others filled the space. The barista who'd once looked away began greeting him by name. A group of kids from the youth group left a drawing taped to the recruiting station door. A stick figure in uniform, standing tall beside smaller ones who looked up at him. The caption read, "Real strong." Cole, his son, quietly arranged a new set of photographs on the wall at the VFW hall. Frank's image wasn't centered or enlarged. It was placed beside others, men had served with, lost with, bled with. A reminder that legacy isn't built by one moment, but by how one moment echoes through those willing to listen. At the church bulletin board, a clipped article from the local paper appeared. No byline, just a title in bold. "The Man on the Bench." Taped beneath it was a note in slanted handwriting. "We see you now." Even the old gas station on 3rd Street, where Frank used to walk past unnoticed, had a new decal on the window. A silhouette of a saluting Marine, and 3 words below, "Honor lives here." And somewhere across town, a boy, maybe the same one who once laughed, stood alone by a flagpole, watching it flutter against a deepening sky. No camera, no crowd, just him, the wind, and a memory that had grown roots. Because stories like Frank's don't end. They plant themselves in the quiet spaces between people, and if you listen closely, you can still hear them, shaping hands, changing hearts, one silent morning at a time. The flag outside the diner fluttered slow and steady. No wind, just the hush that comes when people no longer need to speak. Inside, Harold sat near the window, not centered, not raised, just present. His cane rested against the booth. His coffee, half full. The same booth. The same coat. But nothing was the same. No one said his name aloud. They didn't need to. When he stood, slowly, carefully, shoulders still pulled back, every conversation stilled. One man at the counter rose. Then, another. A young waitress, barely 20, set her tray down mid-step and placed her hand over her heart. Even the jukebox stopped, its final note fading like a breath held too long. Harold didn't wave, didn't nod. He just adjusted his collar, eyes scanning the room once, like taking roll before a mission, and walked out the door into the gold-tinted light. Behind him, silence. Not the kind born of fear, but of reverence. They didn't follow. But every person in that room stood, and stayed standing long after the door had closed. Across the street, someone had added a wooden sign beneath the flagpole. 3 words, carved deep. Some stand forever. If that moment stirred something in you, if it made you sit up a little straighter, breathe a little deeper, and remember what matters most, then let that silence speak. Type "stand" in the comments if you still believe respect isn't a trend, but a choice. And if stories like this remind you that quiet courage still walks among us, then stay. Subscribe. Because some stories aren't told to entertain, they're told to remember.